Hello everyone, I hope you're all having a great week. I'm Karen Doyle, Operations Director of CTAM Europe. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar with our strategic partners, Plume. I'm pleased to introduce Jeff Glavin. I'm sorry, I can't say his surname, Jeff. Jeff Gavlinsky, who is Global VP of Telecom and Wireless Associations at Plume, based in beautiful Colorado. Today's title is, Are we prepared for the technology application innovation onslaught? We're due to last around 30 minutes, which will include time for questions at the end of the session. So please do get involved and post your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. As always, the recording of this presentation will be posted on the members only section of ctameurope.com. If you're not a current member, we'd love to have you join us. So please email info@ctameurope.com for details on how to sign up. Members have access to 2 webinars a month, an annual symposium, which we're hoping to do live in autumn, along with webinars and monthly podcasts from our colleagues at CTAM US. So for now, I will take myself off screen. I'll hand you over to Jeff. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. Very glad to be here. This is a particular topic that I'm going to cover today that I'm pretty passionate about. And one of the things I'll say before I started, given my role, I sit on a whole bunch of boards for associations. And here in the US, I think what's interesting is we spend an awful lot of time trying to pivot fiber versus wireless. And one of the ways that I feel is appropriate to approach the argument on which technology actually has future sustainability is to approach it from those applications that actually will have some impact to networks in terms of how we design, build, and especially deliver broadband services in the future. So I normally like to start out with a couple of quotes to set the tone for the presentation, and these will certainly make sense as we move through the presentation. I think the first quote, symmetrical internet speeds will be a necessity rather than a luxury. Well, back to what I said earlier, we'll have ongoing impacts to WISPs, some MSOs, and existing DSL providers for sure. MSOs might find some, or cable providers might find some relief with the adoption of DOCSIS 4.0, which will enable symmetrical connections. However, the cable industry just went through a very expensive upgrade to DOCSIS 3.1, and this may delay further technology upgrades for them. With respect to the second quote, our industry has been promoting gigabit connections for quite some time now. Although this future-proofs the networks that we're building, and certainly premise connections, consumers cannot take advantage of the capacity coming to the outside of their home because of the lag in Wi-Fi technology enablement. And I think as we go through this will be an important quote to remember. So what are we using today? So current applications, you can see them listed here. These are common. We are at the beginning of a cloud application adoption, hence the reference here to cloud gaming. Currently, most of the applications listed here can be supported by existing broadband technologies, with the exception, in some cases, like cloud gaming, of satellite DSL and some older WISP technologies, which may be taxed by the bandwidth and consistent latency requirements where applicable. So future applications, and this is where things really start to change. So virtual augmented reality, 8K plus video. And the reason why I put plus there is because right now, I suppose we're not sure what comes after after we develop 8K solutions, 8K cloud gaming, immersive teleconferencing, diagnostic telehealth. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the telehealth space. And of course, the elephant in the room is going to be robotics, and I'll discuss that a little bit later. So within the next decade, these applications will be essential. And as high-speed broadband is more readily available, adoption of these applications will be critical, not only for personal entertainment, but for education, our work cultures, healthcare, and even repetitive labor tasks in the home as well as in manufacturing. Effectively, these applications will forever change the way we work, the way we entertain ourselves, and the way we socialize. Moreover, they will change the way we deliver broadband services. Now, let's take a look at how these applications impact broadband. IoT applications that are listed here, for the most part, do not tax or impact most broadband connections available today. I highlighted the ones in red as those are applications that require cloud integration to deliver a full consumer experience. As you will see in the next few slides, however, these bandwidth numbers that I have posted here will start to have some meaning. So if we look forward in the next, say, 3 to 10 years, one could argue the biggest impact to broadband delivery will be in embedded video technology and the maturation of this technology. As the technology improves and matures, so does bandwidth required to support it, and specifically supporting cloud-based rendering. Cloud gaming, for example, requires rendering in real time because of dynamic inputs from users to the cloud servers. And this is why cloud gaming requires a symmetrical connection and very low latency to support it. One key takeaway here is the difference between 8K HDR digital video apps and 8K cloud gaming. Digital video content is created offline, sent to cloud services and servers, and then downloaded to client devices. Hence the dependency on download speeds rather than upload speeds. So 2 additional takeaways here. What comes after 8K? What are the bandwidth latency requirements to support it? And do bandwidth latency requirements drastically change for immersive video conferencing? Today, this is an unknown. So I thought I would have a little bit of fun here with creating some personas in terms of, we got a family work from home, a retired home, and a gamer tech home. Generally speaking, retirees, now I'm not sure about the UK, but I know here in the US, retirees have not adopted newer technologies, excuse me, which is reflected here. There are, however, similarities between broadband usage for a family work from home and the gamer tech personas. But what I'd like you to start paying attention to is the aggregate bandwidth use. Excuse me. The gamer tech household using all the application here in aggregate would need at least 136 megabits download speed, which is slightly above the family work from home. And these numbers, again, will have some bearing as we look forward. So this is where things start to get interesting. So as I pointed out earlier in the presentation, embedded video technology maturation will have a profound impact on broadband services and delivery. Here you can see as technology innovation improves over time, bandwidth requirements must dramatically increase while latency must be reduced. Latency, for example, is estimated to be at sub 2 milliseconds to support advanced AR/VR technologies. And as we discussed earlier, rendering for AR/VR applications is vital for the full immersive experience. What is not shown here is frames per second utilization. Today, AR/VR applications utilize 30 frames per second, and advancing towards retinal 360-degree video quality content, it'll be 120 frames per second as a standard. Robotics is interesting. If we consider robotic assistants in the home, for example, and these robots must interact with the cloud, then bandwidth required is estimated to be at 10 gigabits symmetrical with almost no latency. Although further out in development, this is a massive increase in bandwidth need. So this slide demonstrates that these future technologies will require nearly 1.5 gigabit download speeds and 1.2 gigabit upload speeds if these applications are used in aggregate. And in my opinion, there is no question that they'll be used at the same time, at the same point during the day. Complicating things is how and where these applications are used in a premise. These applications will be used in multiple locations throughout the home, which will require balanced delivery of broadband capacity delivered to the outside of the home, inside the home. And these applications will be used on devices connected to Wi-Fi, which is a really important point here because most consumers don't understand that there are two distinctly different networks serving their home. Although this is a challenge ISPs face today with their customers, this could be more pronounced moving forward. People are becoming less tech savvy and reliant on provided technology to solve their problems. Having said all this, I'm hopeful that Wi-Fi 7 solves these issues and do believe that an adaptive managed Wi-Fi service is a must to enable the best consumer experience in the home. Now we're going to pivot over to data consumption. Now, what I found interesting in doing this research is probably the third one on the right-hand side, which is the time Americans spend gaming per week. 22 hours seems like an awful lot because that's basically 3 hours a day, but those numbers are correct. And actually, the first one is interesting as well. Time Americans spend streaming content per day. And if you think about that number, I think one of the things we've seen in the last few years, and especially during the pandemic, is that we have a lot more people going off of traditional triple play services and effectively off of cable TV subscriptions, satellite TV subscriptions, and are browsing content, at their leisure. And so this includes things like YouTube, any other video streaming application. But some considerations, data cap eliminations have to be considered, as you'll see as we move forward through the rest of this deck. And then my biggest concern going forward is, are we creating another divide? And what I mean by that is, if we do not eliminate data caps and we cannot build the right kind of infrastructure to serve everybody, will we create a technology application divide? not just here, but across the globe. Again, you might recall I said earlier that these applications will have many different use cases, not just for entertainment, but for education, for the way we work, etc. So it's going to be really important in terms of how we legislate this going forward. And I do think if we do not, this could have a profound effects on education, job opportunities, healthcare, and again, mostly this will impact economically challenged communities or households going forward. So if you look at, for the most part, existing, minus the 8K stuff, existing applications we're using today, if you look at the amount of data they're consuming, it's actually quite significant. I know I have been off-grid since 2008. Off-grid meaning that I just have a broadband internet connection in my home. And in the early days, it was very difficult to find content. But as you know, today it's very easy to find content that you can customize and watch whatever interests you. I was on a cable service until now. I'm fortunate to have a fiber connection in my home, but we were consuming a house of four over 3 terabytes of data per month. And so my $70 internet bill became $150 every month. So I think that's a real important consideration. Fortunately, I could pay that, but it is a very noticeable difference, right? And it's not something that people actually consider when they're figuring out their monthly expense. They're expensing the $70, not the $150. So And it could have been worse. We actually had to curtail some of the things that we were doing, especially my kids who are doing online gaming. But as we go forward and look at future applications, now we've gone away from looking at it from a gigabit perspective. Now we're looking at it from a terabit perspective. And you can see these numbers are really extensive. So again, if you look at this from an aggregate perspective, people are going to be consuming a heck of a lot of data. So I thought I would leave you some final thoughts, and then I've got a couple of things that I will be discussing after this, but and I'll talk about this first point in greater detail when I'm done here, but future technology application use will require fiber either at the edge or very close to the edge. And I also think that it will include edge computing will be needed to support it. Symmetrical service speeds are necessary and critical. There's no question. Hopefully that has been a key takeaway for you all. And then instituting data caps, again, will hinder technology adoption and use. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this debate about fiber and other technologies. And as I mentioned earlier, I think at some point in the near term future, if the cable providers move to DOCSIS 4.0, it'll make them competitive with the fiber innovators and fiber providers. However, there's been a big debate around wireless technologies being able to sort of match fiber. And I think this discussion, I'm going to go back to something I said earlier about the fact that there are two distinctly different networks serving a premise. The one coming to the outside of the premise, and certainly the one inside the premise. Now, as an industry, I believe we've taught people to connect wirelessly. So if it wasn't too long ago that folks were suggesting and implying that if you wired your home, that you would get the best experience. Well, the reality of that is people are not going to wire their home. I work in this industry, and I am not going to wire my house because I don't want to spend the money on doing that. And quite frankly, why should I? Now, the problem with this is that for consumers who are less tech savvy, if they have a poor experience inside the home, then the entire connection serving that home is considered by that consumer to be poor. So Wi-Fi plays a key role here going forward. But again, if we go to the outside of the home and talk about other technologies delivering broadband, in terms of what will be required with these future applications, I do think that wireless technologies and even 5G are going to struggle. Now, I could be wrong in the long term with 5G, but in terms of what's been promoted and marketed thus far, I'm not certain that 5G can provide an equitable experience like fiber can. And again, the other thing I'm not too sure that fixed wireless will be suitable to support and enable these applications going forward. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them. So I'll leave you with one thought. I think there's an interesting comparison between what we're doing here in the US and what you're doing in the UK. I spent some time looking at Ofcom's website, and I think one of the things that I think is interesting and comparable to what we're doing in the US is how they tier broadband speeds and definitions. Right. So here in the US, right now, our federally defined broadband definition is 25 megabits download speed and 3 megabits upload speed. Now, there has been some talk to either move that to 100 by 20 or 100 by 100 symmetrical, which is a great advancement. If you go back 5 years, we were still at 4.1, and then we went to 10.3, and now we're at 20, or 10.1, and now we're at 25.3. So it is an advancement, but as you can tell from these technologies, it's certainly not good enough, and it has a resounding impact. So in the UK, at least you have 3 tiers. I'm trying to remember what they're called. I know you've got ultra fast. But anyways, it's a tier between 10 and 300 megabits. So I think that is more forward looking, but it's certainly not good enough. And it's my hope that regulatory agencies see where this is going at some point here in the next few years and actually change it to a gigabit symmetrical. I think that's the only way that we're going to future-proof what we're building. Because if you can get to a point where you're delivering a consistent gigabit symmetrical, then in theory, you could upgrade that to 2 gig, 10 gig, etc., whatever is required. But if we're going to continue to support these lower speed tiers and broadband definitions, we're not going to get there. And I just think it creates a revolving door for funding programs. Here in the US, the other thing that impacts our funding programs is mapping. We have some serious issues with mapping, and we need to change the approach in terms of how we fund based on the mapping itself. So it wasn't too long ago that if you lived in the US census block and one home was served by broadband, the entire census block was considered served. And that simply isn't good enough, because you're leaving a lot of people, you're leaving a lot of people who don't have access to functional broadband connectivity. So it's my hope that again, regulatory agencies and governments, as they consider funding future networks, will consider symmetrical gigabit connections. So are there any questions that were submitted?
Hi, Jeff. Thank you. That was a great presentation. Thanks for putting everything together for us. It was really good. We've got a question that's come in here. Should we already be able to support 4K gaming, connecting your PS5 or Xbox to a pod wirelessly?
Okay, so one of the other things I wanted to talk about was, so the answer to that question is yes. However, there's a caveat there. So it all depends on what console you're using, right? So if you're using PS5, I would say absolutely. But if you're using a PS4 or earlier editions or earlier editions of Xbox, the answer is no, and here's why. Because the network, there's graphical cards and of course the network card inside the console that doesn't support it. But this lends itself to a different problem we have. So I said earlier that as an industry, I think we've set the wrong expectation, because we have been promoting gigabit communities and gigabit connections for 5 or 6 years now. Now, that's all well and good, except that consumers can't experience this in the home. Even in my home, where I have a symmetrical gigabit coming to the outside of my home, wirelessly, at best, I'm going to see half of that. So what does that do to perception? Now, I work in the industry, so my perception perhaps doesn't count, but I look at that and think to myself, why am I paying for a gig if the technology inside the home can only support half of that at best, right?
Yep.
Now, the reason why I bring this up as an issue is because as we build, whether it's cable, it's 5G, or it's fiber, and we build connections that can deliver gigabit speeds, the problem is always going to be the devices inside the home. Because remember, again, consumers are not tech savvy, so they don't understand. I'll make a bold statement and say that most younger people today know that Either they're connected or they're not connected, right? And when they're not connected, the world's on fire, right? They don't necessarily understand why they're not connected. So in a home, you could have other things that could interfere with your connection, home construction, signal interference. And of course, the biggest thing is going to be outdated devices. And I bring all this up because, again, I'll go back to the consumer perception. The consumers don't necessarily know that they're using older devices with old network cards that can't take advantage. It's like having Wi-Fi, going to the store today and buying Wi-Fi 6E enabled devices. Why would you do that? You wouldn't do that unless the devices that you're going to connect to that Wi-Fi network can support that. Otherwise, you're wasting your money because you'll never experience the value that technology can deliver inside your home.
True. My child knows when his Wi-Fi goes off because I've pressed it. When he's in trouble, I can press it on my phone and it all goes off. That's the best part of my day, that.
Well, I think parental controls are important for sure.
Oh, it's fabulous. It's fabulous. Now, we've got another question here. Hello, today there is IEEE group to develop Wi-Fi 8 with more than 100 Gbps for Wi-Fi's radios 5 and 6 GHz. Is there? I think he's asking, is there a group to develop Wi-Fi 8?
Well, I think there are plenty of groups working on this today across the globe, especially the international associations. So the answer is yes, but that's kind of putting the cart before the horse. I think, unfortunately, we're going to go from Wi-Fi 6 to 6E to 7. And if you look at the retail release of these technologies, it really is a short period of time. But again, I think it causes a problem because consumers can't possibly keep up with the technology in terms of buying devices that can enable the value those technologies can deliver. So whether the consumer is always going to lag. So that's why it's important to manage expectations.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, we have no more questions, which means that you must have given all the information that is necessary throughout that presentation.
Well, I hope it was helpful. Thank you so much for having me.
It was. And if anybody has any more questions, have you got your email on the last slide there, Jeff? If not, just remind me what it is.
It's jgavlinski@plume.com.
Perfect. So if anybody has any questions, you can email Jeff directly or us here at info@ctameurope.com and we will forward them on.
I'd be happy to answer any question.
Perfect. Thank you very much. If anybody needs to see a recording of this, and if you're a member, it will be on the members only section of ctameurope.com sometime this week. So thanks, Jeff. Fascinating as always. And thanks for doing it for us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Have a great day, everybody.
You too.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.